Alright everyone, there are definitely leftist elements within the United States that do legitimately hate the United States. They see it as imperialistic and bad, and I think a lot of their goal boils down to trying to convince rational people to stop supporting it in the civic sense in order to try to weaken it, to rip apart its fabric. There are probably provocating antagonistic elements from outside of the United States that are involved in this. It's very funny because they're actually trying to blame Russia for, like, the riots right now. They're trying to say that white supremacists being paid by Russia are the ones actually committing acts of violence, which is bullshit. It's funny because they'll point out pictures, oh, look at this white person smashing windows at this riot. Haha, must be a Trump fan. Most of Antifa are white. That's the whole fucking point. When they say that people are coming in from out of state, these are not Gadsden flag wavers by and large. You may have a little bit of that, but I guarantee 10 to 1 it's leftists. Anyway, the White House last night was briefly locked down because of the scale of violence, various rioters burning things and setting cars on fire and throwing rocks and, chanting death to whoever, like usual unruly mobs of thugs tend to do. And the White House, therefore, was temporarily locked down. That means the exterior lighting gets turned off and Trump gets literally put in the bunker, so to speak. It's funny to see people on the left claiming this is some sort of victory, like Trump has done something wrong. I guarantee Trump himself did not give the order to lock down the White House. The Secret Service did. Probably because they got a tip-off or intel that there was impending possible violence on a scale that could endanger the president's life. That's standard procedure. What I would ask the liberals is, isn't that actually evidence that these are not protests anymore, but a form of quasi-insurrection, you could say? When Michael Moore, the fat ass that he is calling you rebels, of course, when he's applauding you, you have problems. What's happening is that people that were initially pissed at George Floyd being wrongfully killed are now just generally pissed at everything. And again, this is a combination of lockdown fever, number one, ire at Trump among people who have been told for 3 years now that he's Hitler, that he's the terrible person, and who have been propagandized to think that he is somehow responsible for the Democratic state of Minnesota with a Democratic mayor and a Democratic police union and commissioner with regards to the Minneapolis police force, that somehow Trump is responsible for that, number one, could have done anything, number two, and hasn't addressed it properly, number three. I would say that the average American right now, optically speaking, outside of the Twitter echo chamber or CNN's soccer mom Karen audience, is looking at these things with bewilderment at how the left can actually consider these to be a good thing. These riots that have spiraled out of control in many cities. The National Guard getting called in, the White House going on lockdown, and you've got people that are clearly demented, I would say, at some point, that are applauding this. They're pretending, by the way, that Trump, when he's told by the Secret Service that somebody might fire a rocket through a window, so he's going in the bunker, while he's the president, he doesn't really have the ability to say no in that sort of situation. The Secret Service's structure is meant to defend essentially what is the people's asset. The whole concept is that the chief executive is sort of like the sword of the United States. He's the sword of the will of the people. The Secret Service is imposed to guard their property. For the term that he's the president, he is kind of the public's property. He doesn't have an option to go in the bunker. He was forced to go in the bunker. Guaranteed that there was some sort of tip-off about possible impending violence. Now, of course, a handful of people throwing rocks and burning a car is not going to cause that. This was probably the result of them getting intel that there was a terroristic threat of some nature. Somebody, made some crazy threat. Someone made a threat online. Somebody called in a threat, a bomb threat or something. Something like that had to have triggered this. The idea that Trump cowered in a bunker of his own accord. Now, I'm sure that he would rather be up on the roof of the White House, I think, with a loudspeaker taunting these people. And it'd probably be optically a good idea. Now, at this point, and I'm going to weigh in separately on Trump's decision to declare Antifa a terrorist organization. Terrorism itself aside, this is, at this point, gang-enabled, in part. Gangs and cartels appear to be involved with what's going on. There are political terrorists, certainly, to some degree, involved with stoking the flames of hate here. And Trump is not responsible for it. He's clearly not. Trump hasn't done anything to antagonize these people. They started rioting of their own accord over an event in Minneapolis that Trump almost immediately addressed, and they initially demanded that the arresting officer that was responsible for George Floyd's death be charged with murder. Well, he has. The riots don't appear to have gone away, and they still get called protests by the legacy media. So it's a protest, peaceful and constitutional and all above board, caused the White House to lock down. Do you realize what kind of threat is necessary to lock the White House down? It doesn't happen very often. In fact, I don't think it really, in modern history, it has ever happened. 9/11 or something. A riot has to be pretty severe. There has to be something more than just somebody throwing a brick over the White House fence. Because, of course, the Secret Service and Marines and so forth gathered in the White House have enough firepower to wipe out 1 million people, probably. That's not a problem. Something more substantial. A threat had to have been made that could result in significant enough damage to the security perimeter in order to allow a breach or something like that. At a minimum, a bomb threat, or somebody made some post online about filling a cement truck and rolling over the fence, or some stupid shit like that. Something like that had to have happened in order for that to occur. That's not a protest, but they're still being called protests. It's like all the images you have are fucking burning cars and people literally beating people to death in the streets, Rodney King LA riot style. And it's sort of the same thing. By the way, it's going to be remembered the same way as well. There was a huge political hit back against elements that were more favorable towards the Rodney King side over the LA riots themselves. The initial grievance has all but disappeared. None of these people are even invoking George Floyd. And liberal politicians are pretending that the people that are burning cars are legitimate, number one, or number two, have anything in common with the dwindling number of people actually protesting police brutality at this point. Trump, by the way, is not a dictator. He can't really unilaterally go after police brutality. That's the result of corrupt commissioners and corrupt mayors predominantly, and governors unwilling to do their job. Trump, unfortunately, doesn't have a magic... Well, he has an economic magic wand that can keep us out of a depression despite capitalism being suspended for multiple months. It's quite something. Trust me, I'm confused about that as well at this point. He doesn't have a magic wand that can bring George Floyd back to life. And when people are trashing their own communities, it's optically not a great thing. I see the rabid left echo chamber cheering these people on and pretending like the fact that on Twitter, people are like, no justice, no peace, evil Drumfler. Dude, again, you're in an echo chamber politically. If you look at the actual political metrics in the United States and the opinion of the average American, they're not going to side with a bunch of people that are burning cars and shouting about killing white people. That's just not going to happen. Some of these people are deeply anti-white racists. Some of them are political fanatics. And some of them are just thugs. Most of these people are just thugs. I mean, all the lemmings, in order to get a crowd of people going, most of them are going to be mindless. They're just there for the violence. The riot is the goal. They don't have any larger political aspirations. Most of these people want to smash out a window and grab a TV or something like that. It's the base sort of primitive human thing. It's sort of like raiding behavior. We see this among certain apes as well. Certainly hominids, cave people, early man in the sense of antiquity. What did the Vikings do? Go and they'd fucking break a bunch of shit, burn some buildings, rape and pillage. It's a sort of a natural human inclination in times of stress, of course, when people have less food or less stability in general. Like when you've locked down the whole country for several months, like when you don't address simmering political issues in the proper way, like when you have a corporate media lying to people on a 24/7 basis and telling them that the president is Goebbels, yeah, that might cause a problem. Yeah, and I said this days ago when the first few, riots were breaking out in Minneapolis that this was going to happen. And it didn't take a genius to figure out what the effect of the lockdowns is going to be. And also, a lot of this is political opportunism by the left. See, coronavirus is no longer hanging over Trump's head. That's beginning to recede in the public consciousness. So they need to start a civil war or rebellion or whatever the fuck they're going to label it. It'd be funny, actually, if they start calling it a civil war. It's only one step from labeling themselves rebels, which they're increasingly doing. Also, you got to understand, this is still a tiny minority of the population that's actually involved with this. The idea that a few thousand people is something impressive, my goodness, you should have seen the anti-war protests back in the 2000s. And those were largely actual peaceful protests as opposed to violent riots. Yeah, you can get way more than a couple thousand people on the before the White House. This is just I mean, these people are nuts too. You got to be insane to be like within 100 yards of Secret Service throwing rocks. Because trust me, they'll manhandle you worse than the Minneapolis PD. And good for you. It's good if they do that. That's about all. Peace out.